give you an overview of what leadership mindset is all about. And so to help us to do that, just bear with me. We are going to, I'm going to go through sort of the program. So I'm the program manager for the leadership mindset. So I help with all of the coordination for the program itself. I'm going to go through the introductions and share who we've got on with us today. And then we're going to be joined by Professor Bridget Carroll and Dr. Lainey Woolsey. So these are the lead facilitators for the program, and they have just completed our program for 2020. So we're then going to join some of the participants who are now part of the alumni group. And we've got Rebecca, Judd and Tendai Masamba, one from St. John's Organisation and Fonterra, just to share with you their kind of journey and what they got out of the session and the reason for choosing to do this session, along with a couple of other key takeaways for them. And then we're going to have questions and answers at the end. But as we are such a small group, please feel free to raise a hand or pop in the chat box, or even just speak out and ask any questions, or you know, if there's anything that you are particularly interested to know more about, then please, yeah, like I said, just please kind of shout out. And so I'm not too sure to what extent you have looked at the Leadership Mindset program, but just to give you a little bit of background, and I know probably Lainey and Bridget will talk a little bit more to this for you as well, but it's actually run through the executive education team at the business faculty of business and economics here at the University of Auckland. So it is a program that covers 6 days, which is spread across 3 months. So you do 3 lots of 2-day workshops. So in terms of your time commitment, program 1 for next year looks like it's like it is on the screen for you. So we've got the 12th and 13th of April, which I think is the Tuesday and the Wednesday. And then we've got Thursday and Friday on the 13th and 14th of May, and then Thursday and Friday on the 10th and 11th of June. And so in terms of kind of learning experiences, there's obviously some information here, but I think it's sort of best to hear from, I guess, some of us that had the opportunity to attend and participate in this program. But definitely in terms of eligibility, it is absolutely open to, ideally, if you're in your kind of mid-career sort of management, or you've got sort of responsibility of leading teams or working across a number of stakeholder groups. So anything around where you need to, I guess, kind of lead others, or those kind of stepping into management or leadership for the first time, it is absolutely, I guess, an exceptional program to help prepare for that kind of journey. And if not, definitely learn some new tips and techniques around how to lead and manage others as well. So before I can keep talking away, I will hand over now to Dr. Lainey Woolsey, who will share with you a little bit more around what those days look like for the program. And just so you know, so Lainey is a leadership development practitioner here at the University of Auckland. She's also a front edge researcher as well across leadership. And then we've also got Professor Bridget Carroll, also who is frontline and is exceptional in facilitating leadership. So I will hand over to both of them for you now.
Kia ora, Sarah. Tēnā koutou. It's really great to be here today. Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming along. So I've been working on this program for the past year or so with Professor Bridget Carroll, as Sarah mentioned, who was also my PhD supervisor in leadership development. So both of us are very committed to this space, and really excited to be working on this program together, because it really does feel like we're doing something a little bit different, and something that hopefully has really important, meaningful impact in Aotearoa and in the various organisations that come through the program. So usually we have a cohort of about between 12 and 15 people. Occasionally it goes slightly more than that, but it's great to have a real mix of different backgrounds, different organizations and different experiences, because so much of the learning is actually from one another. So I'm just going to spend probably no more than about 10 minutes talking through the structure of those workshops that Sarah mentioned, and the kind of things that you might come up against, and the concepts that we look at, and some of the activities that we do. I don't want to give too much away, but I'll try and give a kind of an overview of that, what the program looks like in terms of the content. And then I'll invite Bridget to comment on anything I forget or I miss. So as Sarah pointed out, the first workshop kicks off in April 2021. It's a 2-day workshop, and we call this workshop Identifying Leadership Mindset. And basically we start with a real reset. Basically, a lot of programs will jump straight into tools and actions, but we actually argue that it's really important to first stop and reflect quite deeply on what leadership is and what a leadership mindset is. So we start by identifying what this thing is called mindset and how it differs from the idea of a tool set and a skill set. So we look and we use examples and stories to illustrate what we mean by the word mindset. And then we work in how does a leadership mindset differ from the other mindsets that leaders are required to adopt at various stages of their work, including a managerial mindset and a technical mindset. So we position a leadership mindset against these other kind of two mindsets. Now, they're not completely distinct and separate from one another. There's going always to be overlap, but we look at some of the signs and ways in which you can recognize when a leadership mindset is required and when these other mindsets are actually more relevant to the work that you'll be doing. So we use some models to do that, some frameworks, but then we actually use real life examples. So that's the point. Usually on the very first day, we spend quite a deep in-depth discussion for the first morning around what is leadership, what is mindset, how can we recognize it, how can we separate it out from other types of work that we're doing in our leadership roles. And then we use some exercises and we get people to really start sharing and talking and sharing their experiences with one another. So after that, we use some case studies to unpack that even further. And then usually on the second day of the first workshop, we get personal and we start looking at, having figured out what leadership is and what a leadership mindset is and when you might need to use it, we start to get quite focused on a particular leadership challenge that each of you might have in your work. And we put some parameters around that and we start to really try and understand which are the leadership aspects of that challenge and which are the other types, perhaps the managerial challenges or the technical challenges. And so we really focus in on the personal leadership challenge that you might be going through. And that's most of the second day of that first workshop. And then in between workshop 1 and workshop 2, we then set up, and we do this very intentionally, we set up some peer partnerships. So we talk about that during the workshop, what peer reflection is, what a peer conversation looks like, so that in between workshop 1 and workshop 2, you're not just completely sort of forgetting about the work that's been done in the leadership mindset workshop, but actually working on it, using it, building it, and talking about what you learn as you do that with somebody that we buddy you up with from the cohort. So that in itself is a really enriching experience, and it allows lots of one-on-one learning to start happening. Anything, Bridget, you'd like me to add on workshop 1, or shall I keep going right through to number 3 and come back to you after that? I can't hear you, so perhaps I'll just
She's got thumbs up, Lainey.
Okay, I'll keep plowing on. Sorry, I can't see you either. I should make it bigger. There we go. So the second workshop is what we call doing leadership. So we start with identifying leadership mindset, then we doing the work of leadership is essentially the framing of workshop 2. And that's when we get really practical and pragmatic, and we throw a whole lot of stuff at you, which is around the strategies of starting to apply some of the leadership learnings from workshop 1. So we look at how leadership challenges can be framed, how we can actually, as leaders, how we can frame those challenges to the other people that we need to be working with in our leadership journey, and how they can be framed, but how can they can also be reframed if it's not quite working in one way, how we can then reframe a challenge or an issue or the work that needs to be done, and also how we can establish the boundaries around the leadership work that needs to happen. And we use lots of case studies and examples again to do that. And we also take it back to those personal leadership challenges, and we try to look at what are the boundaries in that work, and then we share that with one another. So it's a very collaborative kind of peer-to-peer learning design for that particular middle workshop. And then we look at conversations, because conversations in leadership work are really important. And we look at the different roles different people within teams can actually play in driving a conversation forward to achieve whatever it is that needs to be done in the leadership. So it's a very practical workshop, lots of small group exercises. One in particular, which is quite confronting, because actually everybody's watching and kind of analyzing what the types of things we can say to one another and the effects they might have within that leadership work. And then the third workshop is all about sustaining leadership. So we've identified a leadership mindset, we've covered a whole load of different ways that can be applied in our real life organizational contexts. And then the third workshop, which is kind of the aha moment for lots of people, is how do we then really sustain impactful change, having learned all these concepts and ideas? How do we really use those to actually make a difference in our leadership context? And we get into some quite challenging territory. So we look at conflict, and we look at how conflict happens, and we look at the tools and the tactics that we can use as leaders to actually sometimes use conflict in a really productive way, sometimes recognize when actually it isn't serving the purpose of leadership and it needs to be tempered somehow. We also look at change. Change is obviously a hugely important subject in the relationship with leadership. So how do we as leaders embrace change and embed change in order to transform our organizations? And again, we use lots of small group exercises, but we also go back to those personal leadership challenges, and we get really, really deep on those. So there's a model we particularly spend a lot of time on called the adaptive leadership model, and we learn what it really means to apply the adaptive leadership to our own leadership challenges. Again, in between workshop 2 and workshop 3, we have intentional peer conversations, and we also make sure that there's plenty of opportunities within the 2 days that we're at the business school for those conversations to keep going. So the identifying leadership mindset comes first, the doing leadership, and then sustaining leadership at the end. And we feel that's a really great way to kind of round things off and send you back into your organizational context equipped to actually sustain leadership in those different areas. Throughout all that, we do have a metaphor that we're hoping to bring through even more actually in 2021, which is this idea of, and it fits with the adaptive leadership model really well, but it's an idea from Te Ao Māori, which is a beautiful metaphor of leadership as wayfinding. And particularly, as I'm sure most people would agree, in 2020, we're learning we need to be more flexible. We need to be ready to respond to our environmental stimuli. So we do weave through, in fact, hopefully all 3 workshops, this idea of what we can do as wayfinders. What are the signs we can recognize, and how can we adapt and respond in a sensitive way to what we perceive around us. And that's kind of the gist of the 3 workshops. Bridget, would you like to jump in with any specifics?
Yeah. That's a really good description of each of the 3 workshops. So what I'll just try and do for a few minutes is place the context, I suppose, on our assumptions, what we're assuming people are looking for. So our assumption is that people who come on the course because they're at a point in what they do where they realize that primarily their work starts to be working through others, and they are less hands-on to the work for part of their role, and more motivating, mobilizing, supporting, encouraging, leading others. And that might be sometimes positional because there's a team or a promotion, but often it's, I suppose what you could argue is professional, that people are trying to influence across an organization, or with people that they're not directly responsible for. And we see more and more of that. So what we've designed the course to do is essentially to focus on the everyday stuff that you will use most often in leading others to do the endeavor that you're undertaking. So we spend a lot of time in how do you think about doing that? How do you talk to others? How do you frame up what needs to be done? How do you even think in terms of I suppose following processes, but leading them in terms of those bigger change questions? We find people come with big questions around how do they carve out some space, given most of the people on the course have someone senior and wrestling a space to lead, being able to genuinely make a difference. We find that people have a ton of skills, putting them together, it's understanding how to connect all the dots and to connect them in terms of work that really matters to you. So we are at we work with people at a really interesting place in their professional and organizational lives, who really want to do something, that they often have big expectations around them. They often do not have a clear pathway in terms of the power and authority they have. And so getting things done and bringing others with them becomes really, really central. And so that's the sort of meta narrative, for the overarching purpose of the course. And the feedback we get, though you're going to hear from some of our wonderful participants, is that we go a long way to doing that really, really well. So that's the sort of envelope for what Lainey's just told you.
Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, and I can actually think of one individual from the most recent course who the light bulbs were going off absolutely throughout. But for him, it was about, exactly as you say, he had a lot of the knowledge already. He kind of knew the tools, but to be able to then apply some kind of sense around it, to be able to make sense of it for himself, and to then go back and reflect on the detail of how he was doing it. It was really, really important to him. And he actually also managed to take back some of the ideas and share them with his team. So he was actually able to kind of dissipate or diffuse the learning back into his organization, which really helped. So yeah, I think, Sarah, on that note, we're probably ready to hand over to some of the people who've been through it themselves.
Yes, thanks, Lainey. Rebecca, I'm not too sure if you're still with us, but I'm going to hand over to you are. Rebecca, are you comfortable to speak? Great. Share your story.
Yeah, sure. So I've just been asked a few questions to kind of share with you all about my experience with the leadership program. And I guess I would like to tautoko what Lainey was saying about how it's really about learning from each other, and everyone on the courses on a leadership journey. And you really get a lot out of that because everyone's working in a similar sort of space. And one of the big takeaway things for me upon reflection was just actually being able to manage conflict and hold conflict, and being able to have really stimulating good discussions where you actually get somewhere. You know, you're not just having a meeting where you all sit there and go, oh yeah, good idea, yeah, you know, because that's kind of what we do. We kind of, for me, it was very counterintuitive to go, actually, no, I've got to stand up and ask the hard questions, you know, address the elephant in the room, and and sort of be a bringer of conflict. And you know, so that to me was a real, I think Bridget sort of said, you know, you know, you get these real aha moments. That was a real aha moment for me. So yeah, I really felt like that was one of my big take home messages, was just holding that conflict, making that's the space where you learn and grow and have good discussions and can move forward. That's the area of growth. So that was really cool. I guess some stuff that I didn't know and that I've learned is that, you know, again, like Lani and Bridget were saying, you get to frame ideas that you've had and contextualize it, and therefore you can kind of be really intentional about certain things. So again, conflict, change, strategy, execution, you can be quite intentional about how you're going to do something. And that was a really good thing that I didn't really know how to do before. So everyone sort of watched leadership, you know, YouTube videos or read books or done the sort of self-help stuff, but this kind of puts a frame around it and makes it really intentional, which is really good. And like for me going forward, I think, you know, I'll always just make sure that I take that step back and go into the leadership space. So kind of like Lani was saying, you know, you have your technical expertise, your managerial expertise, and then there's the leadership space. And you need to take yourself out of some of that detail stuff and some of that management stuff and get into the leadership space, and then sort of come back to, you know, what's the purpose? What are the priorities? And what are the processes we're going to do to get there? So yeah, I think I've learnt a lot. And again, it's just so great to learn from people that are in a similar space. So yeah, it's a great program. Highly recommend it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Can I just jump in very quickly, Sarah, and say, on that note, we also do try to have at least one guest speaker who comes in, and this time around we had Mark Powell, who's the previous former CEO of the Warehouse Group, and I think that was also a really meaningful session with him. We had it in the middle workshop around doing leadership, because he's such a hands-on kind of leader, and that just helps to really embed some of the learnings that have come up. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Thank you. And then over to you, Tendai. Oh, you just unmute.
There we go. Can you hear me? I'll give it a go again. So hi, everybody online, and thanks, Sarah, for inviting me. I think before I jump into some of the key takeaways I got from the program, I want to spend time in terms of just elaborating where I was in my journey in terms of my leadership, because it sort of sets up the landscape of some of the big learnings that I got from them. Before I came there, I felt like I was fake, yeah, and always potentially undeserving of being in those big spaces where I defined leadership associated with the other people, not necessarily myself. And then yet, in a very conflicting manner, I knew that there was something I could contribute, but I just didn't know how to package it for myself so that it felt good and it sat well with myself, so that when I went into these forums, it made sense. So I looked quite for a long time for the one course that I was going to be purposeful and had good intent of saying, as I go in there, I'm going to be fully committed. I'll do all my homework. I'll make sure that I do as much research as I go through the process. And this was going to either make me or completely destroy me. And I said, if I go to the end of this program and I don't feel good about myself, I'm going to settle and be happy just being a doer and a manager of processes. And I'm glad to say this course brought me on the other end, which is quite refreshing for myself. Many courses, they go through 6 days, 10 days. If I had walked away from this course on day one, I felt like I got most of my value around the cost of this program on day one. If I had walked away and never did all the other 5 days, I felt like I was equipped enough to actually go back and be authentic in my own leadership. And this really came around being able to separate what that expertise is. Most of us, we get into leadership because we're good in a certain area. We get promoted, or we're very good at managing processes or systems. People build confidence in ourselves. But then you feel like you have arrived and suddenly the flashlights go in there and you are a deer in front of floods and you don't know how do you work through this whole challenging space. The tools or the tips, they come bits by bits, pieces, and you never can quite connect it, and you never can quite define where you need to be in different situations. So by just being able to separate what is that work of leadership, what is that work of managing processes and systems and performance, and also what is that managing that expertise, I was able to actually say, you know what, I have done the expertise for a long time. I don't want to be that. I've managed the processes and systems. I don't want to be that. I want to spend my space in that leadership space. And I took that day one and did a little experiment for myself. And I was thinking, you're potentially jumping quite quickly here today. You will get fed up and sort of stop. So I sent an email to my boss and I sent an email to all my direct reports. And I said, guys, where do you see me as a leader today? And where should I be playing as a leader to be able to actually make that difference for Fonterra and for the people around me? So I captured that as a starting point around where my leadership was. And then sort of used the next few workshops to really get a good understanding of how I can improve myself from that position where I was to the position where I want to be. And those workshops in day 3 and day 4, they start sort of really bringing in some practical and tangible tools that you can work with. I mean, the whole thing around framing, reframing, defining boundaries. But what I found more important for me as I worked through that process is, I think it's workshop 3 and 4, where there is quite a lot around reflecting on yourself as a leader and being able to tune in into your values and saying, who am I as a person? What am I able to trade off or to compromise on? And what are some of those must not compromise that will make me authentic, so that if I get to a point where there is strong disagreement, I'm able to express myself very strongly without any guilt and still walk away and have a good night, sleep at night. And that second session, and we worked with this, what was his name? Mark, who was one of the speakers. He really brought it to life and sort of connected it for me, so that when I walk in, where I felt sometimes I was fake, because my values were different from other people, I don't feel that anymore. I feel like that is me. And if there is misalignment, it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It just means I value something different than what other people I'm working with, and still be able potentially to work together to get the right outcomes for the business. So some really, really good learnings in that session 3 and 4. And then we jump into what has changed since I have done this program. A lot. And it's not enough. I will continue to change as I walk through here. The first thing I did was to work through a 2-hour session with my boss. And I said, let's put that 5-year career plan and really have good conversations around the areas I want to work with, the areas I want to mentor in, and the areas I want to be a coach, so that I continue to be growing. Because what I have sort of realized is, over the last 2 to 3 years, I felt like I was a data center. People were coming to me to just get that expertise knowledge. I could have recorded myself and they could have played what the answers were. Personally, I was not growing, and the people like me around me were not growing as well. So really sort of going back to coaching other people to lead, and also to mentoring, so that they get that knowledge that opens up the space and the time, so that I can actually spend on the key projects, and that those spaces where there is a lot unknown or ambiguity, and I'm growing myself as a person. The second thing I did was I was actually very deliberate and put myself in a very vulnerable position where I went to my team and I open up myself. You tell me some of the behaviors that you see from me that you would want to change for me to be a better leader. And at some point, one of my guys goes, "Are you serious?" And I go, "Yes, I am," because I could not have asked this question if I was not serious. And you actually become very vulnerable, because at that moment I'm thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't have actually asked this question. But at the end, it actually didn't become about me. The output of that was a set of ways of working that enables me to grow, but enables them to grow as leaders as well. And there is still, I mean, that intent of actually continuing to mentor them, continuing to coach them. And I find myself now, I mean, we talked, I think it was in session, the last session around the conflict, where sometimes the conflict is quite subtle. And if you don't pick it up, it's likely sort of to impact how some of those deliveries are for a project or any piece of work you're doing. And I'm quite deliberate to bring those subtle conflicts to front so that people can openly contribute and exchange those ideas, so that we are quite upfront around where there is disagreement or where there is need to refine our thinking to get to a better outcome that's beneficial to all of us. When I look across the whole program, I felt, and I did say it in the last day, Lenny and Bridget, I feel like I've been given the license to lead, and to lead in the space where I'm not comfortable that I don't know everything. I've always been the person who goes into forums. I want to have read everything. I want to preempt what the outcome is, but I'm not comfortable to just go in and listen and then help to make sure that we're creating mutually beneficial solutions, not to go in there with an intended outcome. So I felt like you guys gave me that license to freely sort of participate without any preempted outcomes. What else is there? What have I learned about myself? I think I can be vulnerable, but still be a strong leader. It doesn't mean that I am weak in cases where I am vulnerable. And in terms of the people I met on the course, I mean, you have to understand we're coming back at the back of all those Black Lives Matters in America and the COVID. And you're not quite sure when you walk in these forums and saying, what are people thinking? Are they likely to be too sensitive around you? And I remember the first day I was sort of isolating myself. And then as we walked through, we talk around diversity, but then stop around just diversity. I felt included in the whole process. The conversations I had with participants, they were not conversations to be polite. They were conversations to understand who I am as a person and to have more of my opinion, so that the conversation was more fuller than just a courtesy to have a conversation. And one of the people that you paired me with, guys, Kerry, I mean, the background was so aligned, the thinking so aligned, and going forward, she's a person that I will, on an ongoing basis, whether it's a personal or work matter, I can always pick the phone and have that comfort that I can actually have a robust and good debate around sort of some of the decisions I need to make. What advice do I give to anybody who wants to take this course? So I'm a twin, yeah? And the only one person I've always wanted to be more successful than myself is my twin, yeah? And I've told her she needs to do this course. To me, it's a no-brainer. Depending on where you are, whether you're at crossroads in your career, whether you have gotten in that space and you just want to learn and understand more what leadership is, this course for me, it's a no-brainer. You do it and you walk away redefined and really equipped with what really leadership is. I would think that for many people, it needs to be one of those foundational courses as people move into leadership. Thanks, Sarah. Back to you.
Thanks, Tendai. That's that was quite a nice way to close, actually, because I like how you said that gives you the license to lead, but more importantly, you have come away kind of redefined as a leader. I guess without sort of taking any further sort of limelight in any way, but I also had the opportunity to be a participant in this course. And I myself, my background has had years of leadership and management experience. And part of my thinking when I went into the program was that, I've done a lot of leadership training. I've, done everything from crucial conversations to HR processes to performance management and collaborating at senior kind of stakeholder meetings and so forth. But I have to say it was quite enlightening and also very, the way the program is actually designed and put together, it is quite challenging in a very, very positive way. And also you kind of, everything that kind of had been learned over the years of experience kind of changes the whole kind of way of the approach and how you look at things and think about things. And I think to Rebecca's point, the experience that everyone comes with is invaluable, because everyone comes with different backgrounds, different experiences, and also different challenges, to what Tendai said, personal and professional challenges that you're really able to kind of tackle, confront, pull apart, put back together again. There's a lot of kind of hands-on and a lot of practical application of what you learn as well. So it is something that you kind of live and work through and learn as you go. Which I think is just, it's just very invaluable to you as individuals, depending where you are in your personal and professional lives, to be honest. But what I would like to do is obviously just say thank you very much to Tendai and Rebecca for sharing their story, but also ask before we go and close off, but really, are there any kind of questions or anything anybody would like to ask or know or kind of share around what you've heard and learned? Obviously, I'm available afterwards as well, so you can either reach out to myself or Dave Evers, I think, who a lot of you may have spoken to. But any questions whilst you have the audience here, especially to Lainey and Bridget, around if you are thinking about this, what it can mean and what it can bring for you. You can feel free to use the chat. If the answer is obviously you're very comfortable with what you've heard, then of course myself and Dave will do follow-ups from here, and obviously can have further conversations if there are any sort of further questions. But anything, Lainey or Bridget, that you'd like to kind of finish and close the session with today?
I just wanted to echo your thanks to Tendai and Rebecca particularly. Really lovely to hear some of those very personal reflections, and yeah, I really look forward to watching your journey. Keep in touch, and for those of you who might be in the program next year, I'm really excited to meet you in person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, if everyone's comfortable, we are at the end of the session. Like I say, we'll just stay online if there are any, if anyone does have any sort of questions or wants any sort of information, then myself and Dave will obviously just stay put. But thank you, Lainey, thank you, Bridget, as well, for obviously sharing what is to come ahead for us next year.
Welcome.
And yeah, and of course to Rebecca and Tendai as well.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.